we are on to cooking. We are making wild rice mushroom soup. Wild rice is one of the only grains native to North America. Wild harvested rice is an indigenous sacred food of the Native American Anishinaabe and Ojibwe people of Minnesota and the Great Lakes region. Many of the people that harvest wild rice do so every September, and they have for years. So I think it's definitely a misunderstood grain, though. First of all, though wild rice mimics conventionally grown rice in many ways, it isn't actually a true rice. It's an aquatic grass with an edible grain inside of it. But it is called rice because it looks like rice and it's a grain. And the act of harvesting it, traditionally done by hand in a canoe, is called ricing. But here's another thing. Much of the wild rice sold in stores is not real wild rice, which grows wild in lakes and creeks and rivers. It's actually cultivated paddy rice. And as a matter of fact, people that actually harvest wild rice call it paddy rice because it's grown in paddies. So in the 1960s, the University of Minnesota began domesticating wild rice. They genetically modified the rice to make it sturdy for mechanical harvesting, planting it in rows in flooded paddies, which they drained to harvest by combine like any other field crop. This created a whole new industry and, not surprisingly, problems. So like screwing up traditionally grown and harvested wild rice sales because people just don't know the difference between the two, and cross-contamination between the real wild rice and the cultivated wild rice is also a problem. So if you have a choice to make, and you certainly do, and a little time to find it out, seek out the real wild rice. And I say to buy real wild rice because it's delicate and nutty and delicious. And I'll call out a vendor at the Minneapolis Farmers Market that hand harvests and sells the real deal, Scenic Waters Wild Rice. So go find them this weekend. Now let's talk about the mushrooms. In this recipe, I put white mushrooms in the actual recipe, but the truth is you can use any type of mushroom that you want. And I picked these up from Tiny Tinks at the Minneapolis Farmers Market last weekend, and I've already chopped them up for this recipe, but they are oyster mushrooms. I thought we'd show a little clip of Tiny Tink's farm, but first, before we do that and before we get to the recipe, let's take a look at some actual wild rice, because I have both kinds here, so I thought you would like to see what the difference is. So this is cultivated paddy rice. We bought this at a grocery store, and you can see it's significantly darker. And this is what it looks like when it's cooked. And this is probably really familiar looking to most people because this is what they end up buying because they don't know about actual wild rice that's hand harvested. So this is hand harvested wild rice, and Mark picked this up for me today. Mark, you bought this at a co-op. I did not make it to the market last weekend, so that's why we picked this up, so you could see the example. But it's a lighter color. And sometimes, I mean, it'll vary in color depending on where they harvested it from, whether it's a river or a lake, and it's just going to vary in color. Sometimes it has almost a greenish tinge to it. This has a kind of a grayish color and brown, and sometimes it'll be a light brown. So it varies significantly. And when it's cooked, this is what it looks like. This rice took about a half an hour simmering, and then I left it covered and another 20 minutes before it got to this point. It's pretty chewy. This rice took 15 minutes. I just simmered it and it was totally perfectly done. I drained it. What I like about hand harvested real wild rice is that it is very delicate, very nutty. It's just delicious. And I think a lot of people have never experienced it because they've had this. So go to the market this weekend and buy some wild rice. It's just wonderful. Scenic Waters. That's what you need to do. Let's get rid of this and we'll start cooking. And this is the rice I'm using in this soup, so I'll set that aside. So I've got here 5 tablespoons of butter. In the recipe it calls for salted butter. I'm actually using unsalted butter, mainly because we're trying to cut down on our salt a little bit, so I'm going to kind of back off on it. You can taste your way through it. of course. So I decided to go with unsalted. But really, typically when I make the recipe with the salted butter and the salt that we're going to add, it tastes pretty great. So you can kind of play around with that though. But anytime you want to back off of salt, of course, starting with unsalted butter is a good place to start. And a little bit of sodium is in just about everything. So you need to, if you have salt issues, you need to consider that. Okay, this is melting up nicely. And then I've got here 1/4 cup of minced yellow onion. I'm just going to lower this heat just a little bit. And I want to soften up this onion for a couple of minutes. I feel like I've been having wild rice soup in some form for years. I mean, wild rice has always been a part of my life. I grew up in northern Minnesota in the town of Chisholm, and we always had wild rice around. Holidays, it was usually part of something. Never really made a stuffing with it until later in life, but in one of my earliest memories of buying it on my own as an adult was I took wild rice with me to Italy when I went to meet my family, and they were so confused. They were like, what is this? And at the time, I didn't really know. I mean, I thought it was rice too, and I think they cooked it like risotto. I think that was their solution to it. But when I was doing my research the other day for this, a lot of people cook wild rice and toss it in maple syrup. What a great combination, wild rice, maple syrup, right? Just like I was thinking wild rice, mushrooms, perfect combination. Okay, so now what we're going to do is add in our 2 cups of mushrooms. And you know, in the recipe I say to mince them. These I kind of chopped and minced some of them because I want to taste some of those pieces of mushroom. I don't want them to fade into the background because of what I'm using, the oyster mushrooms I'm using. So let me just toss those in. Now these have to saute for about 10 minutes. So I think this is the perfect time to show the movie of Tiny Tinks, vendor at the Minneapolis Farmers Market. And we actually did this movie in the spring for the outdoor cooking masterclass. Do you remember? That's right, Mark? Mm-hmm. So the weather is not going to match up what's going on now, but the interview is great. So enjoy it.
We have the cold or the warm weather seasonal mushrooms that we cycle through that are grown in the greenhouse. We've got the downstairs grow, which has all the cold weather varieties like the maitake, the nameko, piopino, some of the more exotic ones. Cold weather oysters, the lion's mane. And then we have the microgreens, and then we have the pink oysters. Let's see, these guys are actually ready to go in that outdoor greenhouse. These ones are shiitake. We've got some golden oysters right here. White or pearl mushrooms. These ones are really meaty. Another warm weather variety. We've got king trumpets up here. I really love the king trumpets.
I do too.
And we've got one called hirotake right here. It has the appearance of a king oyster, but it has the soft texture of an oyster, but it has the umami savoriness of a shiitake. So it's got a really good mix of 3 different things. Chestnuts, these are part of the Foliota family. I believe we have some namekos, unless we've fruited them all.
What does that mean, fruited them?
So fruiting. So when it produces a mushroom, so the mushroom is the last stage of life. So it'll grow and grow and grow until the mycelium has reached its food source, all of its food source, and then when it runs out of food, it'll continue to digest and break down the wood, the lignin in the wood, until it runs out of food and it says, I don't have any food. If I have to produce a mushroom, because I'm going to die, basically. So
this is like the mushroom speaking.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So So then the mushrooms will go up and release the spores, and the cycle repeats. So the idea with mushrooms is that we're trying to figure out a way to grow mushrooms and use that as a part of an entire farming system. So we have the mushrooms that produce the stuff that we use to enrich the soil, the garden, which is no-till, so that's constantly being amended. The mushrooms are also pretty complicated to grow, but they're fun and well worth it.
Well, they're absolutely beautiful. And then eventually these will just be turned into really good compost?
Yeah. So you don't necessarily have to compost them. You can just break them up and put them over the top layer of the soil. So you don't have to turn them, which is really nice.
All those years of turning soil, and I had no idea. Fantastic. So where do you get these blocks?
So we make these.
You make them?
Yep. So when we saw Danielle downstairs in the lab, she was inoculating these.
Okay.
Yeah. The one thing that we don't do is we don't make our own. We make some spawn, but we don't make a lot of it. It's really complicated stuff to do really well.
Spawn.
Yeah. So the spawn is so the way the mushrooms are grown is you start with culture, like an ice. Like you can take a mushroom and take a piece of the tissue and put it in a dish and have it clone it, and then you take that and you grow it on sterilized grain. And the grain acts as a medium so that you have different particles that mix in throughout the solder.
I am so glad that we got a chance to run that interview again. What a wonderful operation, and I know they've been doing really well at the market this summer. It's so fun to see a small business just evolve like that. Speaking of evolving, what's going on with my mushrooms are they have browned pretty nicely here, given off some liquid. They smell fantastic, and I am going to go ahead, and I've got this over medium heat, by the way. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. I'm going to add in a 1/4 cup of sherry wine, all in. Stir that in a little bit, and then I'm going to sprinkle in a 1/2 cup of flour. Let me do this the other way. I'm right-handed, so it's always best to stir with my right hand. So what this is going to do is make a really nice roux. It's quite a bit of flour. You have to cook the flour, so you keep that heat on, and you keep stirring it. And it seems a little like it's going to scorch, but the heat's at medium. And certainly adding that sherry cooled it down. I want to do this process of cooking the flour and getting everything nicely coated. Let me turn that heat down a little bit. I just turned it off. Touchy burner. Hold on a second here. There we go. I want it on low. It doesn't really do low. Just wanted to turn it down a little bit while I'm doing this. So I want that heat. Sorry about the squeaking. That's not the mushrooms. The mushrooms were squeaking earlier. Now it's the burner because I'm stirring vigorously. Don't worry about it sticking on the bottom. That's going to work itself out when we add the liquid in. But you want to cook that flour now and get rid of that raw flavor to it. You want to do that, otherwise it will taste like raw flour if you don't go through this process. So at least a minute, if not longer, and you'll notice the flour is starting to brown and darken. That's a good sign that you're almost there. Okay, so we have a little bubbling up here again. I'm going to add in my chicken stock. I have 3 cups. This is homemade chicken stock. I was like, and those pieces that you see going in there is actually just a little fat. This is homemade chicken stock. I made this yesterday, and it always has a little bit of fat in it. And I skim off most of it, but I like to add, okay, so I like to add this in and give it a good stir. This is where I get rid of the lumps. It's a lot like making gravy. You just have to work kind of gradually, and if you do that, then you don't have problems later with lumps. Okay, so let's add in more. I'm going to go with another third of this, and I'm going to increase my heat. Oop, there we go. So this is a really different way of making a soup as opposed to, you know, your typical not cream-based soup. And this has a little bit of cream in it, but it's not just cream. Working with a roux. And it's funny what I can smell now. I can smell this kind of mushroomy, buttery, and a little bit of chicken in the background. It's really nice. If you wanted to go vegetarian, by the way, you could use a veg stock for sure. If you wanted to go without dairy, there's dairy added at the end, but you can see this thick creaminess is not coming from the dairy because it's not there yet. And of course you can substitute the butter either using a vegan butter or some other type of thing like a margarine type of thing if you want to go oil based, or you could just use olive oil if you wanted to do that as well. Just trying to give you some options of places you can go if you want to avoid certain things. And the cream at the end, if you're okay with something like a silk product, then you could add, they make a creamer that I haven't been able to get to try. I found it and I haven't actually tried it, but that would be a nice addition to just add that little creamy finish to it. But as you can see, I think you could go without the cream and you would be fine. So let's get the rest of this stock in there. And I said 3 cups, I do believe. Of course, you get your hands on some homemade stock, then so much the better. Okay, now let's get this up to a boil. Now we're going to increase the heat. And we're going to let this go for a little bit. I just want to get it bubbling. And let's take this off here. So speaking of maple syrup, that's the other thing that I brought on my first trip to Italy. It was, I was pretty young, had no idea. I mean, I had an idea, but I really didn't have any idea how amazing the food culture would be in Italy. So of course I bring them food, and they were befuddled. They didn't. And I speak enough Italian to be absolutely dangerous, so it was funny. But then they came back and said, well, we make risotto. And I thought, okay, wild rice risotto. So, and that actually works. So why not, right? Okay, come on, simmer here, friends. Let's do that. Turning that heat up a little bit. We're going to finish this off with a little more sherry, by the way. Oh, that's the other thing. Can you omit the sherry? Yeah, you know, I think that you want to have a little acid in there. And if I were going to omit the alcohol, because I wanted to omit the alcohol, I would probably use apple cider vinegar. So, and maybe less of it because you don't want it to be really vinegary. But the whole point of acid is to accentuate the taste, just like the whole point of salt is to accentuate the taste. It's not necessarily to have it be overtly alcohol-y or overtly salty. You want to just kind of creep up on the salt level and an acid level to accentuate the taste of all of the other ingredients. Here we go, now we're bubbling. And you can see how that's really thickening up. Okay, let's go ahead and add in our 2 cups of wild rice. And it took 3/4 of a cup of raw rice to make this amount, just so you've got a gauge. A cup, and same thing for either kind of wild rice, same amount. A cup was a little bit too much, so I went with 3/4 of a cup, and that was perfect. And then I have a 1/2 cup of shredded carrot. That's going to add a little color and a little sweetness and a little texture. Perfect. Now, because I have unsalted butter in here, I know I'm going to need some salt, so I'm going to go with about 3/4 of a teaspoon, and then we will work from there. Okay? Now what we want to do is let this simmer for a little while. In the recipe I say about 5 minutes, which I think is about perfect. And what that is going to do is cook that carrot a little bit, get all those flavors to meld. But you can see this goes together really quickly. It's a nice soup in that way. It's not, if you cook your rice ahead of time, which you have to anyway, then, really this is 20 minutes to put together. Pretty simple amount of time. And it keeps in the refrigerator beautifully. So that's a good thing. You can make it a day ahead. It just gets better as it sits. Like anything that's cooked like this, it's not going to get worse. And I'm really glad that I left some of those mushrooms in larger pieces, because look at how nice that looks. And I'll be able to taste those all the more. Okay. Do you have any questions for me while I'm just waiting for this to do what it's doing? Are you awake over there?
Does the true wild rice have more nutritional value than the cultivated?
So the question is, I hope I got this right. Does true wild rice have more nutritional value than the cultivated wild rice? It's not vastly different, but it has higher protein levels. And that's fairly well documented. A lot of what else I saw was very similar, but the protein levels from the testing that I was able to find are consistently higher. So it does have that going on for it. And of course it's a natural product, so you always love that. You know where it comes from. Most of the time when you buy something like this, okay, so for example, you picked this up at the store today because I didn't get to the market last weekend. So, and I wanted to show you what natural wild rice really looks like. But this was basically from the Ojibwe, right? Is that what you said?
That leads to another question. I assume the hand-harvested rice is quite a bit more expensive.
Yeah, it is more expensive because it's hand harvested. So you can tell me how much you paid for both of these.
$19.99 a pound versus $6.99 a pound.
Okay, so $19.99 a pound for the hand harvested and $6.99 for the cultivated wild rice. Not surprising. The people that are hand harvesting this are going out into the wild no matter what the weather is, in canoes and harvesting this. And from what I've seen, I mean, you have a period of time, and you're basically in a canoe or a boat, and you're pounding the rice out of the grass, and it's a kind of an amazing process. And then they parch it, and parching is actually kind of a heating process that cures the rice and makes it stable. Okay, I'm going to say this is great. So I want to add to this, I'm going to turn this down a little bit, 2 more tablespoons of sherry. And this is just going to give it, I mean, sherry is just a wonderful kind of fortified wine that has a lot of complexity to it and sweetness, not overtly sweet, but sweet. Really nice. And from here on in, all I'm doing is getting everything heated. And then I have a half a cup of half and half. And that's going to just bind this all together, make it super creamy and delicious. Just like that. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that. Okay. So I'm going to just let this come up to a bubble, and it's already doing it. So I'm confident that this is going to be nice and warm, and it's done. Let me just pull this off of my squeaky burner and get rid of the burner. All right. And then I'll plate this up. Oh, first though, before I do anything else, I am going to taste it and see how that salt level is. I always have my tasting spoons handy. Oh, wow. That's so delicious, so rich. But if you look at the recipe per serving, the calorie count is not that high because remember there's a finishing half and half on this, but it's not really a cream-based soup. It's a broth-based soup with a little cream added at the end, or half and half added at the end, and it's made with a roux. So it's technically lighter. Let me try that again. Oh, wonderful. Okay, perfect. So let's lose the sherry. I have a ladle here. I always try to keep everything clean, but I end up kind of destroying the place no matter what. Okay. I can't believe this season is done. I just, well, not at the market, but for me it is done. This is our last one for this season, and we have been going strong since the end of May every week, except for 1 week. I can't remember what happened. We missed one, but okay, look at that. Oh, okay, so what I'm smelling here, I can smell that sherry mixed with that nutty rice. It's just divine. And I have some, they're actually sliced blanched almonds. In the recipe I say slivered, but this is what I had. So pretty. So I guarantee you, when we're done here, Mark will turn off the camera, he will grab this bowl, and he'll just leave the room with the soup, and that's it. So do you have any other questions for me, Mark?
I don't see anything right now.
Okay. So can we talk about what we have coming up in the cooking club this weekend? Okay. And I have to look at the picture because I'm so into wild rice soup right now, I can't remember. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is a vegetarian moussaka with bulgur. A moussaka is typically made with lamb, and it has wonderful seasoning. So we switched this lamb out for bulgur, which is a wonderful grain that it mimics the texture, and it's a delightful dish. As you can see, it looks like a lot of cheese, but actually that's a bechamel sauce over the top of it, and it's baked. And that is what we're doing this weekend in the club. We're trying to get more vegetarian recipes in. There's a boatload of them already, but we wanted some new inspiration for the fall, so that's what we have been working on. And of course, eggplant is everywhere right now, so that's what we're doing on Saturday at 4 o'clock. Cooking Club members, be there. Okay, anything else come up there?
That's it.
Okay. Well, I think we're about to sign off then, unless something else happens. I just want to say thank you, Minneapolis Farmers Market, for a wonderful season for us. You will see me soon at the market. I want to for sure go to that celebration on the October 30th through the weekend. I can't think of what it was called. What was it called?
September 30th.
September 30th. Did I just say October? September 30th. So you'll see me then for the pancake breakfast, I think. That would be fun. But thank you so much for sharing your airwaves and for all that you do for the board, for the staff, and for all of the volunteers that work at the market. And we will be back, I think, in the spring. And otherwise, go to BonicelliCookingClub.com and check me out there and the Cooking Club. And we will see you all soon. Take care. Bye. Mwah.